You know, the reason why I love making fishy lures is that I get to challenge myself in a variety of different ways. And I gotta say right off the bat, this is probably the hardest thing I actually ever attempted to carve, just because how small it is. And before I was gonna go with a bigger version, I think it was 8 centimeters long, but then I was like, I kind of want to challenge myself even further, so I scaled it down into 6 centimeters, and I'm just gonna cut it out now and transfer that into a block of wood. So yeah, this is gonna be a soft plastic bait, and I'm gonna be making a mold later on, but before that I need to make a mold master, and that is exactly what I'm doing right now. And I'm sure somebody out there is gonna wonder what sort of wood I'm using. This is just maple, and maple is really good for precise carving because of the density and how hard it is. So the next few moments are going to be a montage of me doing various things to the lure that I don't think require any kind of explanation, so just sit back and enjoy the montage. Now that I determined the center line, I'm just gonna start tapering off the tail section and the head. And I honestly didn't feel like I needed any kind of template for this, so I just ended up eyeballing the whole thing. I'm gonna start rounding up the bait now, and I'm just gonna use my knife to take care of most of the material. And the cross section of this bait is gonna be kind of like an oval, and reason for that is that I just wanted to do an oval shape really. There's not really any deep thought that went into determining that. And I kind of like sometimes go with that route and just do whatever pops into my mind and feels good really. And after that, I'm just going to sand out the surfaces and actually start carving. I've said this in my other videos too, where I do some sort of carving, that I always start with the eye socket. And the reason for that is that it's really easy for me to actually start aligning all of the lines around the eye socket and use that as a kind of like an anchor point for everything else that's gonna be around it. Now that I have all of the head details drawn on, I'm just gonna start carving them out. And if you've seen any of my other videos, you know that I'm gonna cut along the lines first, and then I'm gonna basically go behind the lines and draw out the three-dimensional shape. And after that's done, I'm just going to start sanding down the details and make everything nice and smooth. And I think it goes without saying that you want to have a extremely sharp knife when you do this, especially for a small piece such as this. I gotta say, after I was done filming and moved on to the editing side of things, I noticed that it doesn't really translate very well in the video how hard it was to actually hold on to the bait, especially if you're blessed with having sausages for fingers like I am, and not have the bait flying off from your fingers, which did happen a few times. So ever since I did that Gizzard Shad earlier this year, I wanted to include this kind of like a pot belly or pronounced belly on all my baits. Few of them that you guys haven't seen yet, but yeah, more about those later on in the year. But yeah, I feel like this effect kind of like lifts up the whole carving that a little bit higher. So, you know, I just wanted to include this to pretty much every single bait that I now make. Just, you know, just one more small detail that kind of like, it's not necessary really, but, you know, it does make the whole piece look a little bit more cooler, I think. You know, I gotta say, by far the hardest thing about this bait is to do the fin raise. Although I have to say that the pectoral fins that I'm doing right now are not nearly as hard as to do as the other fins that I'm gonna be doing later on, which have even finer details, and of course the fact that they're tiny makes the whole thing really challenging. But what I really learned about this procedure is that you have to be extremely calm in everything, in all of the movements that you make, or else you're gonna completely ruin the whole thing. And you gotta be so gentle with the blade as well. And again, it's a kind of a shame that you can't really feel what I'm doing through the screen, because the pressure that I'm putting on the blade while I carve, it's almost non-existent. It's really, you kind of have to do it to know what I'm talking about, I guess. Now that I have the pectoral fins all sorted out and carved, I'm gonna move on to the scales. And what I'm gonna do first, I'm gonna make this grid pattern that I'm gonna use to align all of the scales. And the height of these scales is gonna be 2 millimeters. So that should give you some idea how small these scales actually are. Like with the other carving that I did earlier, I'm going to do exactly the same thing to these scales, where I'm going to cut along the guidelines first, and then I'm going to go behind the scale and basically lift off the scales and make them look three-dimensional. Now that the scales are done, I'm gonna move on to making the lateral line. And basically what I'm doing is I'm using this round diamond file to push these small holes along the side of the flank of the bait, which are gonna represent a lateral line. Like I mentioned a little bit earlier, the hardest thing about this bait for me personally was to do the fins, and especially the anal fin, pelvic fins, and the dorsal fin were quite challenging, to say the least. And I was thinking about what kind of material I could use to actually make these. I mean, obviously I could have used the maple that I was using for the main body of the bait, but then I was like, I have a lot of these popsicle sticks just kind of like lying around. So I ended up using those, and I have to say these actually worked out really well, so I think I'm gonna be using a lot more of these in the future. Now that the fins are done and ready to go, I just need to make recesses for them so that I can actually glue them into the bait. Before I can start gluing anything onto the baits, I still need to make one more thing, and that is the paddle tail. And I ended up using the same popsicle stick wood that I was using for the fins to make the paddle tail out of. Okay, now that I have the paddle tail ready, I'm gonna start gluing stuff onto the bait. And I thought that I might as well start with the paddle tail. And the glue that I'm using is just normal super glue. So again, my plan is to clear coat this mold master, but before I can do any of that, I still need to shape and sand the paddle tail section. Like with the video I did earlier this year about the Gishard Shad, where I ended up painting that one black, I'm gonna do the same thing to this small bait. And again, the reason for that is that I'm gonna be able to spot any kind of mistake that I might have made while I was actually carving the bait, and you know, make some sort of adjustments or alterations to them before I actually end up clear coating the whole thing. I'm sure there are a few of you out there wondering what sort of clear coat I'm actually using now, and this is just normal acrylic clear coat that you can get from any kind of hardware store. So the mold master has been drying for a couple of days now, and I put 7 layers of clear coat onto it, and now I can start making the mold itself. And I'm gonna start off by embedding the other half into the mold clay. Now I'm just gonna fill out the gaps that I still have in the mold and try to make sure that the potting line is as flat as I possibly can make it, because that has a really big impact later on when I actually start to pour the soft plastics. Okay, so since this is going to be a soft plastic mold, I'm gonna make sure that none of the hot plastisol is gonna leak out from the mold when I actually start to pour them. So I'm gonna make this kind of like a casket around the piece, and that should prevent most of the hot plastisol coming out from the mold. And also it acts kind of like a locator piece that's gonna make sure that the mold is aligned properly when I actually close it. In order to make sure that the mold is going to be filled out completely when I actually start pouring the hot plastisol inside it, I need to make sure that these problem areas that are going to trap some air in them are going to have some sort of air vents. So I cut some of these pegs to make sure that that's not going to happen. And simply glue those onto the pelvic fins. Now I'm gonna start pouring the mold silicone inside the mold box, and I'm using Mold Max 30 like I use on pretty much every single project that I do. I like how it's rigid and it doesn't really accumulate a lot of bubbles. And speaking of bubbles, what I'm doing right now, I'm pouring a thin layer of Mold Max on top of the Mold Master, and I'm gonna give it 5 to 10 minutes time to sit there, and that is usually enough time for a lot of the bubbles that are still going to be inside the mold silicone from all of the stirring and mixing to burst, and I'm just gonna pour the rest on top of that later on. Now that the other side is completely cured and I've taken off the mold clay, I'm gonna do pretty much exactly the same thing I did for the other side to this side, with one exception. I'm going to spray on a layer of mold release before I actually pour in the rest of the silicone. That way I make sure that I'm gonna be able to take this mold apart. Now that the mold is cured, I can take it apart and see what I got here. And of course take off all of the pegs that I have still inside the mold. Before I can start pouring any soft plastic baits, I'm going to have to make a pour hole. And yeah, the easiest way of doing that is just to use a knife. I'm gonna start pouring the soft baits now, and usually whenever I do the very first pour, I always preheat the molds. I have a feeling that somebody out there is gonna wonder what sort of plastisol I use. And the brand of plastisol I use for these baits is from Bright Baits, and it's the extra soft variety. And of course I don't think I need to mention this, but I'm gonna mention it anyways. Whenever you play around with hot plastisol, wear gloves. I noticed when I was thinking about what to paint that I tend to go with a lot of natural colors, so we're gonna go completely different end on this one. So I'm gonna paint something that we, or at least I know as a parrot color, which consists of green back, yellow flank, and a orange or red belly. And I'm sure somebody again is gonna wonder what sort of soft plastic paints I'm using. These are from Cap Coatings, Finland. And to finish off the baits, I'm just gonna glue in some eyes. And the type of glue that I'm using here is the same exact super glue that I was using earlier to attach the fins. And this is actually Loctite precision glue, and it's really good for this stuff. I use it all the time. In my previous video I had a comment from a user telling me that, hey, you should probably show the baits a little bit more closely before you actually end up heading out to the lake and fish with them. And you know, after thinking about it a little bit more closely, yeah, that's actually a really good point, because I almost never do that. So I'm just giving you guys kind of like an overview of how the bait looks in different angles. And I gotta say, I'm pretty happy with the end result. Alright, I have a fish on, or I had a fish on. Let's see if I can catch another one. There we go. First perch. I think it is a perch. Yep. Not a very big one, but I'll take it. Wow. This guy's not getting off. Yeah, first perch. Nice. Let's try the cats. Something a bit bigger. Whoa, there's definitely something attacking those bait fish over there. You know what? I think I will anchor onto this place and see if I can catch something from here. I have a feeling that there's going to be a lot more fish out here. Maybe even switch into a heavier head. So what I think I will do, I'm gonna change into something a little bit more natural, because there seems to be a lot of those small bait fish around here. And I think I'm gonna change into this guy. Let's see if I can actually get something a bit bigger than the one I just caught a few moments ago. I don't know, the head might be a bit too big, but I really want to get right down to the bottom really fast. Maybe get a reaction strike from the perch that hopefully are hanging around here. I think I'm gonna start off from the deeper side and work myself close to the weed line over there. Oh, I think I had a hit right away. Yep. Oh, lost it. Okay. My hunch was correct. Ooh. Some action going on there. Let's give it another shot. There we go. Again, not a big fish, but wow, he really ate it. Let's try to get something a bit bigger. Ooh, there we go. Not a big fish, but at least it is a fish. And jigs are working really well. Just need to find those big perch. Oh, it's coming a bit deeper. Is it a... yeah, it's a perch. Definitely a better one than the one I caught before. Still, it's not very big. Look at that, that's pretty funny. Impaled by the perch's fin. Wow. I think I need to change the soft plastic. Yeah, nice little perch. Still not the monster I was looking for, but still better than nothing. Let's see if we can still use this one, or is it completely unusable? Yeah, that'll still work. What I did was I actually cast it a really long way. Right about there. There we go. This feels big. If this is not a pike, it's a really big perch. I feel like this is a pike. It's not really doing much. Oh, it is a perch. Completely gave up when I actually reeled it in. That's kind of funny. Yeah, nice little perch. Last cast in this spot. Ooh, what the heck? This is definitely a pike. Yeah, that was most definitely a pike. It felt like a pretty decent one too. No noticeable damage. Oh, there's a little bit of... yeah, that's definitely a pike. But let's see if I can entice that pike to strike again. I did feel like I had it hooked already, so I'm pretty sure it's not gonna strike again. They usually don't. Not after they're hooked. Wrong. Whoa, this actually feels really solid. It's not actually big. They're a kilo pike, I'd say. Whoa. Alright, let's get the forceps. I should have actually already took these out prior, but you're lazy sometimes. Yeah, it really inhaled the jigs, so gonna be needing jaws openers. Ooh, that's a lean pike. Go and eat something. See ya. Oh, ooh, what's this? It must be a pike. I don't know. It feels odd. Maybe a foul hooked a perch or something. Or maybe it's an eyed. You know what? I think it's an eyed. It's fighting like that. Yep, it is an eyed, I think. Cool. I got to show you guys one of these cool guys. It's a decent one. Let's dude. Here we go. Nice. I'd say it's probably 800 grams, maybe 900. Cool fish anyway.